The massive hangar bay of the starship, Valiant, hummed with anticipation. The crew moved quickly in the dim light, preparing for the first public demonstration of the Titan-class dreadnought, one of the most advanced ships humanity had ever constructed. Its sleek metallic surface gleamed under the overhead lights as the massive vessel stood in the docking bay with its weapons array pointed toward the stars. However, it wasn't just the sheer size of the ship that made this moment so monumental. It was what lay at the core of its design: dual railguns, capable of firing 2 projectiles at near light speed, one after another. The whole galaxy had heard rumors about these weapons, but today humanity was ready to show them off for the first time. Admiral Lena Ward stood at the command center watching as engineers conducted their final checks on the railgun systems. She had been in the military long enough to know that humanity was always outmatched technologically when it came to the alien fleets they fought, but the dual railguns had the potential to level the playing field. It wasn't just about power, it was about precision. 2 shots fired simultaneously, one for each of the target's weak points. No alien defense system could handle that much force, hitting from 2 directions at once. "Are we ready?" she asked, turning to her Chief of Staff, Commander Marcus Hayes. "All systems are green, Admiral," Hayes replied, his voice calm, but there was an edge of excitement in his words. "The railguns are fully charged and ready to fire." "Good," Ward said with a nod. She had trained her whole life for moments like this, and now she had to prove that humanity was capable of taking control of the skies, that they could match any alien force with clever strategy and the right weaponry. With a signal from her command station, the countdown began. The massive railguns on the Valiant came to life, crackling with energy as arcs of electricity danced across their powerful coils. The target was a distant asteroid formation, rigged to simulate a heavily armored alien battleship, a test of the railgun's power and effectiveness. 10 seconds to firing. The voice of the chief weapons officer echoed through the control room. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The countdown ended with a pulse of energy, and 2 railgun projectiles shot out of their massive barrels. In an instant, the 2 beams of destruction cut through space, the sound of their departure barely perceptible in the vacuum. But the result was clear. In the blink of an eye, the asteroid was shattered into millions of tiny fragments. The 2 shots had been perfectly synchronized, and the target had been torn apart with surgical precision. The room erupted into cheers and applause. Even though this was a test flight, the demonstration was a resounding success. Ward allowed herself a small smile. The skeptics would no longer doubt the power of the dual railguns, but there was still much to do. There was no time to celebrate, not yet. "Prepare for live fire engagement," she said as she turned to the tactical officer. "This is just the beginning." As the Valiant began its journey toward the front lines, Ward couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to change the course of history. Humanity had just entered a new chapter in the war, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Valiant glided through the void, its sleek hull cutting through the endless black as it moved into the heart of enemy territory. The vast alien fleet lay ahead, a web of advanced warships and dreadnoughts that had been causing chaos across the galaxy for years. Humanity had always struggled to hold its ground against such overwhelming numbers, but now, with the dual railguns installed on the Titan-class ships, they were about to face their foes with new confidence. Admiral Lena Ward stood at the command chair, staring at the holographic display of the battlefield. The enemy was close now, a massive formation of ships arranged in a defensive position around their flagship. She knew this would be the moment to prove that humanity's new weapon could change everything. "All hands prepare for battle," Ward commanded, her voice firm and commanding despite the calm exterior. She could feel the pressure mounting. There was no room for error today. The crew responded immediately. Every station came alive with activity as tactical officers locked onto targets and weapons officers began charging the railguns. Ward watched as the data streamed across her screen. The Valiant was nearing the enemy line now, the railguns ready to fire. "Ready to fire on your command, Admiral," the chief weapons officer announced, his voice tinged with excitement. Ward's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the enemy fleet. The aliens had always relied on their superior numbers and firepower to overwhelm humanity's defenses, but now with the dual railguns, humanity had the ability to strike with precision and overwhelming force in the blink of an eye. It was time to make their move. Target their flagship, Ward ordered. Fire both railguns. The two shots were fired almost simultaneously. The energy surge as the railguns discharged was felt throughout the ship, but what happened next was something no one had ever expected. The first shot tore through the enemy flagship's defenses like paper, as the second shot followed in perfect synchronization, impacting a secondary weak point further down the hull. The flagship exploded in a cascade of fire and debris, a spectacle that left even the crew of the Valiant in awe. Target their remaining ships, Ward barked, her voice sharp as she processed the unexpected success of the first shot. Fire again. The second salvo was just as devastating as the first. Two more alien warships were reduced to nothing more than space debris as the dual railguns continued to unload their deadly payload at rapid intervals. The enemy ships were helpless against the two-pronged attack. Their shields couldn't recharge fast enough to defend against the coordinated assault. Within minutes, the alien fleet was in chaos, their ships either destroyed or fleeing the battlefield in disarray. Ward's crew worked in harmony, continuing to fire both railguns with pinpoint accuracy as the Valiant swept through the enemy lines. "We're winning," Commander Hayes said with a mixture of disbelief and excitement as he watched the hologram of the battlefield shift in humanity's favor. "Not yet," Ward replied as she kept her focus on the enemy ships. "We have to finish this." But the battle was already turning in their favor. Humanity had never been able to break through the alien defenses so decisively before. The railguns had created an opening that no one had thought possible. As the last of the alien ships turned to retreat, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. The Valiant had delivered a resounding victory. The dual railguns had proven themselves in the heat of battle, and the alien fleet had been routed in record time. "Prepare for pursuit," Ward said as she turned to her crew. "We're not done yet." This victory was only the beginning. Humanity had just unlocked a new level of warfare, and the galaxy would feel its power. The aftermath of the battle left the Valiant drifting through space among the scattered remnants of the alien fleet. The starry expanse stretched endlessly beyond the ship's reinforced hull as Admiral Ward stood at the command chair. A sense of victory pulsed through her veins. But beneath that was something else, a realization that humanity's tactics had just shifted irrevocably. The dual railguns weren't just a weapon of power, they had the potential to redefine how war was fought in the galaxy. "We've never seen anything like this before," Commander Hayes said from his station, his voice filled with awe as he looked over the damage report. "Those railguns wiped out the entire fleet in a matter of minutes." "I know," Ward replied as she studied the tactical display. The remaining alien ships were scattered, some barely functional, and others drifting aimlessly as they retreated into the depths of space. She couldn't help but marvel at the effectiveness of the new technology, but the thought that stuck with her was how could they use this advantage to shape the future of warfare? It was clear now that dual railguns weren't just an upgrade, they were a game changer. The ability to strike with precision and power from two separate angles had given humanity a decisive edge over their enemies. The problem was the rest of the galaxy would soon realize this too, and they would adapt quickly. "What's next, Admiral?" Hayes asked, his tone serious now. "We've got them on the run, but we need to decide how to use this power strategically." Ward's eyes narrowed as she analyzed the data, her mind racing with possibilities. The enemy had always relied on brute strength and sheer numbers to overwhelm humanity, but now they had to face a force capable of crippling them. With a single coordinated strike, humanity's fleets no longer needed to be overwhelming in size. They could be surgical in their approach. A well-placed shot could dismantle an entire enemy squadron. "We won't just attack head-on," Ward said thoughtfully. "We're going to hit them where it hurts. We'll use the dual railguns to target their command ships and supply lines, disable their reinforcements, and throw their operations into disarray." Hayes looked up at the Admiral, his eyes bright with realization. "So we'll be using the railguns for tactical precision, instead of just overwhelming force." "Exactly," Ward confirmed. "The power isn't in the destruction alone, it's in how we control the battlefield. If we can disrupt their chain of command and communication, we'll cripple their ability to respond and organize. We can dismantle them piece by piece." The crew quickly fell into a new rhythm as Ward's plan was put into motion with the dual railguns. Now their main weapon, they moved from one alien stronghold to another, taking out supply depots and decimating critical infrastructure. The railguns proved to be the perfect tool for this new strategy. They didn't need to engage in lengthy battles. They simply needed to strike hard and fast. Each strike weakened the enemy more and more. Their forces were thrown into chaos as their most vital assets were torn apart, leaving them scrambling to regroup and retaliate. But by the time they could react, humanity's ships had already vanished into the blackness of space, their mission complete. Ward stood at the bridge, gazing out at the stars, her mind already turning to the next battle. The dual railguns had given them a new strategic advantage, one that humanity had never had before, and with it came the power to change the entire course of the war. The galaxy had underestimated humanity before, but now they would see that humans didn't need to fight like their enemies to win. They just needed to fight smarter. As the Valiant continued its campaign across the galaxy, Admiral Ward couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their success would come at a price. The dual railguns were an incredible advantage, but they came with a series of challenges. That humanity had not yet fully accounted for the power required to fire the weapons was immense, and every battle seemed to take a toll on the ship's systems. The engineers had been working around the clock to improve the ship's energy efficiency, but even with the best minds in the fleet working together, the strain on the reactors was beginning to show. "Admiral, we're approaching the next target," Commander Hayes said, his voice tense, as he glanced at the map of the enemy fleet's position. "We've located a major command ship in their defense grid." "Good," Ward replied, her mind sharp despite the growing concern about the Valiant's capabilities. "Let's hit them with everything we have, but make sure the railguns are fully powered up for this strike." The crew began to prepare for the assault, but as they moved closer to the enemy flagship, something unexpected happened. The ship's systems suddenly started to malfunction. Warning lights blinked on the command center screens, and the ship's engines flickered erratically. "What the hell is going on?" Ward muttered it as she gripped the armrest of her chair. "What happened to the power systems?" "Admiral, the cooling system for the railguns has failed. We're losing energy from the reactor at a rapid rate," the chief engineer reported, his face pale with worry. "If we don't stabilize the systems, the railguns could overheat, and we won't be able to fire at all." Ward's heart sank as she realized the severity of the situation. If they couldn't fire the railguns, they would be sitting ducks against the enemy's superior numbers. They had already taken out some of the alien fleet with their earlier strikes, but this was a critical moment. Humanity couldn't afford to fail now. "Status report on repairs," Ward snapped. "We're doing everything we can, Admiral," the engineer responded, "but the damage is extensive. We're estimating at least 30 minutes to stabilize the system. If we push it any harder, the railguns could explode." "Damn it," Ward muttered under her breath. She couldn't afford to wait 30 minutes. They needed to take down that command ship before it could call for reinforcements. She looked around the room for a solution when her eyes fell on Lieutenant Sarah Cormack, the ship's weapons officer, who had been quietly observing the situation from her station. "Lieutenant Cormack," Ward called out, "you've been working on optimizing the railgun's power systems, haven't you? What can we do to get them back online quickly?" Cormack didn't hesitate. She stood up immediately, her mind already working through the problem. "We can bypass the damaged cooling system by rerouting power from the auxiliary generators. I'll need full control of the power grid for a few minutes, but it should work." Ward nodded. "Do it, Lieutenant. We don't have time to waste." Within moments, Cormack was deep into the ship's systems, using her expertise to stabilize the cooling unit. She worked fast, her fingers flying across the console as she adjusted power levels and rebalanced the load on the reactor. The crew watched in tense silence, knowing that the fate of the mission rested on her shoulders. As the minutes ticked by, Ward watched the countdown to their target engagement. She had seen her crew face countless obstacles, but this one was different. If Cormack couldn't pull this off, they would be sitting targets for the alien fleet. "Come on, Lieutenant," Ward muttered under her breath. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Cormack's voice rang out from the console. "The railguns are back online, Admiral. We're good to go." Ward's eyes flicked to the tactical display, showing the alien command ship and its heavily defended position. Target the flagship, fire both railguns on my command. With a deep breath, Ward gave the order, and the 2 railgun projectiles shot out in perfect synchronization, both strikes hitting their mark as the alien command ship exploded into a mass of debris. The remaining enemy fleet scattered in chaos, and humanity had claimed yet another victory. The crew erupted into cheers, but Ward felt a quiet relief settle over her. The battle wasn't won just because of the railguns, it was the ingenuity and quick thinking of her crew that had pulled them through. "Great work, Lieutenant," Ward said, nodding at Cormac, who simply smiled and returned to her station. "Just doing my job, Admiral," Cormac replied. Ward looked out into space, her thoughts already moving ahead to the next challenge. The war was far from over, but humanity had proven once again that they could overcome any obstacle as long as they worked together. The aftermath of the battle left the Valiant floating in the cold silence of space as the last remnants of the alien fleet retreated into the darkness. Humanity had just achieved another victory. But Admiral Ward knew something had shifted on a deeper level. The dual railguns weren't just changing the way they fought wars, they were starting to have a psychological effect on the enemy, something that no one had fully anticipated. Yet the aliens had always relied on overwhelming force and fear to keep their enemies in check, but now they were facing a force that could strike with devastating precision at any moment. "We've got reports coming in from several sectors," Commander Hayes said as he looked over the tactical readout. "The alien fleets are starting to pull back from several key areas. They're in full retreat." "It's not just the firepower," Ward replied, her voice thoughtful. "It's the fear we're instilling in them. They've never had to deal with something like this before." Hayes looked up at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Fear, Admiral. We've always known that their fleets are massive, but they've never been intimidated by us before. Why would they start pulling back now?" "Because we forced them to rethink everything," Ward said, leaning forward in her chair, her gaze focused on the empty stars outside the ship's viewports. "Those railguns don't just break through their shields, they break their confidence. We're not just hitting them where it hurts, we're hitting them in ways they didn't think possible. They're starting to question their superiority, and that's more dangerous than any weapon." On the alien side of the galaxy, the leaders of the Empire were having emergency meetings trying to make sense of the new threat that humanity had become. Their intelligence reports were full of confusion and fear. The human fleets were no longer acting like the desperate underdogs they had once been, but like a well-coordinated and deadly force. Each battle showed more signs that the humans were using their new weapons to create chaos and disorder in ways the aliens didn't understand. Their fleet commanders were reporting that they had begun to hesitate during engagements, wondering when the next railgun strike would come and where it would land. "We need to act quickly," one alien general said during a strategy session. "The humans have shown that they can strike at the heart of our forces with devastating accuracy. We can't continue like this. If we let them continue, they will cripple our entire war effort." But even as the alien leadership scrambled to find a solution, their morale was beginning to crumble. The knowledge that at any moment their fleets could be shattered by 2 well-placed shots was beginning to take its toll in ways that even the most powerful military hardware could not counteract. They had no way to predict where the next strike would come from or which of their ships would be the next to fall. Back aboard the Valiant, Ward could see the effects of the changing tide as the reports came, and the enemy fleet's reluctance to engage was becoming more pronounced. They were trying to reorganize, but without the confidence to make coordinated decisions, they were falling apart. Even as their numbers remained high, their cohesion was beginning to fray. "We're breaking them down," Ward said quietly as she stared at the tactical map. "They may still have the numbers, but their resolve is crumbling." "It's like a game of chess," Hayes said, his voice thoughtful. "They don't know where the next move is coming from, and that's what's causing them to hesitate." "Exactly," Ward agreed, "and when an enemy hesitates, they lose." As the Valiant moved into position for its next mission, Ward felt a surge of optimism. They were no longer just reacting to the alien threat, they were forcing the aliens to react to them. The fear that had always been in the background of war was now a weapon in their own right, and the results were starting to show with each victory. The psychological advantage grew. and humanity's position in the galaxy was becoming stronger than ever before. The Valiant continued its relentless march through the galaxy, its railguns cutting through enemy fleets with brutal efficiency. But as they moved from one victory to the next, Admiral Ward began to notice a subtle shift in the crew's morale. The constant battles were taking a toll on everyone. The crew had grown accustomed to the thrill of victory, but there was a quiet undercurrent of weariness. Now each new engagement seemed to drain more energy from them. They had been on high alert for months, and the demands of the dual railguns were starting to show. Ward stood on the observation deck, staring out at the vast emptiness of space, her mind drifting to the growing fatigue of her crew and the burden of responsibility she carried with each decision she made. The war was not just being fought with weapons, it was being fought with the hearts and minds of those who served in it, and she knew the strain was beginning to show in the faces of her officers and crew. Admiral Commander Hayes said as he approached her, his tone unusually somber, "I think we need to consider taking a break. We've been on the front lines for a long time, and the crew is starting to show signs of exhaustion. Morale is slipping." Ward turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I know, Hayes, but we can't afford to slow down now. The alien fleets are starting to regroup. If we stop now, they'll regain their footing, and we'll lose all the ground we've gained." "I understand that," Admiral Hayes replied, "but at what cost? We're pushing the crew to their limits, and beyond. We've seen a few members already start to crack under the pressure. We can't keep this pace up forever." Ward took a deep breath as she processed his words. It was true, they had pushed hard for months. Their victories had come at a high cost, but she knew that the alternative was even worse. They couldn't afford to give the enemy a chance to recover, not when they were so close to breaking them. "We'll push forward," Ward said finally, "but we'll have to be smarter about it. We'll rotate the crew, take some time to rest when we can, and use our victories to our advantage. We don't need to be on the front lines every moment of every day." Hayes nodded, though he looked unconvinced. "And the railguns?" he asked. "We're pushing the ship systems harder than ever. If we don't manage the strain, we could have a catastrophic failure at any point." Ward knew that Hayes had a valid point. The railguns were the backbone of their success, but they were also the most demanding part of the ship systems. The constant strain on the reactors and cooling systems was a risk they couldn't afford to ignore. They had been lucky so far, but luck wouldn't hold forever. "I'll talk to the engineers," Ward said. "We'll find a way to balance the strain. We can't let the railguns fail now, but we can't burn out either." She turned back to the stars, her mind racing with the weight of her responsibilities. She knew that each victory came with a cost. The war was taking its toll on everyone, but she also knew that they couldn't afford to stop now. The enemy was weakening, but they were far from finished. As the Valiant moved into its next mission, Ward felt the weight of leadership more than ever. The crew was her family, and their well-being was just as important as the success of the mission. But she had no choice but to keep moving forward. They had come too far to back down now. "Prepare for the next engagement," she said, her voice steady as she addressed the crew. "We fight to win, but we fight smart." And so they pressed on, knowing that each victory brought them closer to the end of the war. But at the same time, they knew that the cost of those victories was growing heavier with each passing day. The Valiant had been in deep space for weeks, now moving between engagements with the alien fleets, each battle harder than the last despite the tactical brilliance of their strategy. The strain on the crew was beginning to show even more clearly than before. Exhaustion and tension ran high, and even the most experienced officers could be seen snapping at each other under the pressure. The constant presence of the dual railguns and the demands of their use were wearing down the crew's morale. Ward had been careful to rotate personnel and offer what rest they could, but it was never enough. The endless war had begun to erode their sense of hope. It was during one such tense moment in the command center that Ward first noticed the shift. Something in the air felt wrong. As she walked down the hall to the briefing room, she overheard raised voices coming from one of the lower decks. She moved toward the sound, curious but cautious. What she found shocked her. There were a small group of junior officers gathered in a corner of the ship, their voices low but angry as they spoke amongst themselves. "This isn't right," one of the officers said, his voice tight with frustration. "We're pushing too hard. They're asking too much of us." I know, another officer agreed. We're burning out, and for what, so we can keep fighting this damn war without ever seeing the end of it. Ward stepped closer, her presence unnoticed by the small group. As she listened to their words, she felt a pang of guilt. She knew they were right, the crew had been pushed beyond their limits. But it still struck her hard to hear it spoken aloud. There was no denying the truth. The constant battles were beginning to break their spirits, and she had been so focused on the grand strategy and the victory ahead that she had overlooked the toll it was taking on her people. We should be pulling back, the first officer continued. Take a break, let the crew recover. We can't win a war if we're all dead on our feet. But if we stop now, another officer said, we'll lose everything. We've gained everything we've sacrificed. We'll be for nothing. We'll never get another shot at the railguns if we fall back now. The debate was growing heated when Ward stepped forward into the light, her voice steady and commanding. That's enough. The officers froze when they saw her standing there, their faces a mixture of surprise and fear. They hadn't expected the Admiral to be in the area, much less to overhear their conversation. Admiral, we weren't. One officer began, but Ward held up a hand to silence him. I'm not here to scold you, Ward said, her voice softer now. I understand the pressure you're all under. I see it every day. The truth is we've pushed ourselves to the limit, but we've made a choice to keep fighting. And now we have to live with that choice. The officers looked down, not daring to meet her gaze. It was clear they were torn between their duty and the exhaustion that had begun to creep into their souls. But I want you all to understand something, Ward continued. This war isn't just about the victory, it's about how we fight it. We have the railguns, yes. But we also have something the enemy doesn't. We have each other. We have the ability to keep going when the odds are against us. And that's why we'll win, but only if we can pull together as a crew. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. There was silence for a moment before one of the officers finally spoke up. We don't want to let the crew down, he said quietly. We just don't know how much more we can take. Ward nodded. I know. And that's why we need to find balance. We'll keep fighting, but we'll do it smarter. We'll take care of each other and look for opportunities to rest. When we can't afford to break. We're in this together. The officers exchanged glances and slowly nodded one by one. Thank you, Admiral, the first officer said with a resigned but determined tone. Ward turned and walked away, her mind already processing the situation. Her crew had spoken up, and it was clear they were reaching a breaking point. She would have to find a way to keep them together, to give them the strength to keep going. But that would mean finding new ways to fight this war in a way that preserved not only their lives but their spirits. The battle for the galaxy wasn't just a matter of strategy or firepower. It was a test of endurance and resolve, and Ward knew that if she couldn't keep her crew strong, then the war would be lost no matter how powerful their weapons were. The days following the confrontation with the officers were tense aboard the Valiant. The mood on the ship had shifted slightly from the heavy fatigue of constant battle to a more reflective atmosphere. The crew had been given a chance to rest and recover in small increments. But Ward knew it wasn't enough. The internal unrest was still there, lurking beneath the surface. She had to act quickly to maintain control and keep the morale from collapsing entirely. Admiral Hayes called from the bridge, his tone alert. We've just received new intelligence. The alien fleet is amassing in the outer rim. They're preparing for a large-scale offensive. It looks like they're getting ready to hit several of our key systems. Ward felt a knot form in her stomach. The aliens were making a final push, and this could be the turning point of the entire war. They could either crush them with the power of the dual railguns or risk losing everything by being outnumbered and outflanked. She glanced at the crew members who were working tirelessly at their stations. The wariness in their eyes was evident, but so was the determination they had to push through this final stretch. Prepare the crew, Ward said firmly. This will be the largest engagement we've ever faced. We need everyone on their feet and ready to fight. We'll give them everything we've got, but we'll do it differently this time. We'll fight smart and not just hard. The crew's reactions were immediate. There was a shared understanding. Now they had been through the worst of the fatigue, and now they knew what was at stake. The entire future of humanity rested on their shoulders. But Ward's words had sparked something, a renewed sense of purpose that had been buried under the weight of endless battles. "I want all hands on deck," Ward continued. "We'll use the dual railguns to break their lines, but this time we'll target their communications hubs and command vessels first. We'll cripple their ability to coordinate and disrupt their reinforcements. That will buy us the time we need to get the rest of our fleets in position." The crew moved into action almost instinctively. They were a well-oiled machine by now, each member working seamlessly together. Under Ward's command, the engineers had already made improvements to the railguns' power systems, which would allow for a longer sustained fire without overloading the reactors. The weapons were ready to deliver their devastating blows once again. As the Valiant moved into position at the edge of the enemy formation, Ward surveyed the tactical display, her fingers tapping nervously on the armrest of her chair. She couldn't afford another failure, not when everything was hanging by a thread. The alien fleets were formidable, but she knew that they had a chance to cripple them for good if they could execute their strategy without hesitation. "On my command," Ward said, her voice low but filled with purpose. The bridge fell silent as the crew prepared themselves for the strike, each person tense but focused. Ward felt the weight of the responsibility settle onto her shoulders, but it was no longer a burden. It was a call to action, a moment where she had to lead them through the fire and prove that humanity could face down impossible odds and come out victorious. "Fire both railguns now," Ward ordered. The twin railguns erupted in unison, sending twin bolts of energy streaking across the vast expanse of space. They collided with the alien command ships in a flash of brilliance and power. The alien fleets immediately lost their cohesion and began to scatter into chaos. The communication channels went silent as their leadership was decimated, and their coordination broken. The Valiant didn't wait for the dust to settle. They moved in quickly, striking at the weakened enemy forces with precision and swiftness. Humanity was no longer just defending, they were taking the fight to the aliens, and doing so with devastating effectiveness. Within hours, the alien fleet was in full retreat. The remaining ships no longer had the strength to resist humanity's new tactics and firepower. The victory was swift and decisive, but it was also a reminder of the cost, the toll it had taken on everyone aboard the Valiant. The crew had proven their strength, but Ward knew this wasn't the end of the war, it was just a new beginning. As she stood on the bridge overlooking the stars, once again Ward felt a mix of pride and caution. The road ahead would be hard, and the challenges would continue, but humanity had proven that with the right leadership and determination they could overcome anything. The war was far from over, but they had taken the first step toward a future where they no longer had to fight just to survive. "Get some rest," Ward said to her crew as they began to process the victory. "We've earned it, but stay sharp, there's more to come." And with that, the Valiant drifted through the stars toward the next challenge. The crew, knowing that they had proven their worth in the darkest of times and were ready to face